Greetings. My name is Vinice Davis. I am a venture partner at Imaginable Futures, a venture of the Omidyar Group. Imaginable Futures is a global philanthropic investment firm that believes that learning has the power to unlock human potential with a focus on learners ages 0 through adulthood. My work centers on the post secondary success of adult learners, more specifically, learners who have children. I am thrilled to moderate today's panel, Preparing Students for a Changing Workforce. Today's panel, we will discuss ways in which higher education can continue engaging adult learners at all stages of their career to ensure continued workforce success. This is important now more than ever before. By 2027, post secondary enrollment among adults is projected to grow by just 1%, as compared to 5% for traditional age students. Recent OECD analysis suggests that while about 1 in 7 jobs is at risk of full automation, another 30% will likely be overhauled, with workers with less training at much greater risk. As the future of the workforce changes, access to reskilling opportunities in post secondary education will be critical to ensuring robust employment for all workers. I am joined today by two amazing panelists, Chauncy Lennon, Vice President, the Future of Learning and Work at Lumina Foundation, and Sid Espinosa, Senior Director of Philanthropy and Civic Engagement at Microsoft. I would like if you guys can introduce yourselves. I'll start with Chauncy.
Thanks so much, Vinice. It's great to be here. I'm Chauncy Lennon at the Lumina Foundation. At the Lumina Foundation, our mission is building a stronger nation through equitable, high-quality learning opportunities for all. As some of you may know, we focus on the attainment goal, getting 60% of adults ages 25 to 64 a credential of value by 2025. But we don't just do that as an exercise in numbers. We believe that high-quality learning opportunities are a path to economic justice and racial justice. And as we look towards 2025 and the years in front of us, we're increasingly focused on the importance of helping adult workers access the kinds of affordable, flexible, job-focused learning opportunities that will give them a shot at secure and stable careers.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chauncy. Sid?
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thrilled to be here with both of you. Such an important conversation to be having as a country and really around the world. I'm at Microsoft, a small software company as it was traditionally known now, of course, a robust portfolio, but also known for the investment of hundreds of millions of dollars worth of partnership with nonprofits and universities around the world every year. Even before the pandemic and the recession, we were shifting our primary philanthropic focus to skills and employability. This is really a big deal. As you can imagine, there's 1.7 million nonprofits in the US alone. We get requests every single day on a host of different issues, and we really think hard about what are those most pressing issues where we can play a role. What we were seeing in workforce is that there was a fundamental change in the workplace. Seismic shifts in jobs and in industries often related to technological advancements. We're seeing technology permeating every field, whether you're a nurse or an architect or a farmer. It wasn't about everyone becoming a computer scientist, rather that there's an importance in learning the language of computational thinking and understanding and how it's influencing every aspect of our lives. We were seeing a shift, frankly, to a skills-based economy where credentialing and similar training programs will become critical and where skills are really the new workplace currency. So earlier this year, we launched an aggressive and multifaceted philanthropic engagement in this space, committing to skilling tens of millions of people over the next few years around the world. And I'm guessing that's sort of what we'll want to cover today. It is, though, a primary focus, going back to our focus really on empowering every individual and organization around the world. And so completely aligned with that, thrilled to be part of this conversation and look forward to the discussion.
Wonderful. As I said, we do have two amazing panelists. I'll start off with our first question. The days of having a single job or a single skill set for your entire career is well behind us. A study by LinkedIn found that in the first decade out of college, millennials changed jobs on average 4 times, while Gen Xers changed jobs only twice. I will not share which generation I am in. But as we embrace this new era of fostering multifaceted workers, where are the opportunities for reskilling and retraining adults, specifically adults, for new career pathways in this new rising demand? Why don't I start with Chauncey?
Thanks. So, I think there's a couple ways to think about this question. So, for one set of workers, they're going to find a moment in their careers where their industry goes away, not just their job, their industry, and they're going to have to fully retrain. Right? They're going to have to figure out, especially if they want to stay where they're living, what are the kinds of opportunities. Those opportunities might be, a whole scale shift, right? And that's going to require more extensive retraining. But in some ways, before the retraining, it's going to require a certain amount of navigation. We're going to need a world in which people can go to community college, to your four-year institution, to other kinds of education training providers, and get a real kind of clear, informed sense of what the opportunities in their community and their region look like, and what are the pathways they can move forward. Right? We've seen that before. Certainly, large initiatives around helping people adjust to trade in parts of the country where trade has decimated industries. And in fact, we've seen some success in building institutions that don't just provide job training, but provide information and provide access to the kinds of supports workers need as they transition. So that's one kind of experience people should maybe anticipate or may find themselves having. But I think the more likely thing that people will have that isn't really captured by those statistics about changing jobs is that there won't be radical shifts. You will find yourself kind of on a meandering pathway where you discover that maybe certain kinds of skills you had need updating, right? Maybe you need a new kind of adjacent set of skills that allow you to move up in your sort of current trajectory, or you want to take step to the side and go up, but sort of connected to the kind of branching off the pathway you're on. And that actually, I think, is a very different kind of experience people need to think about, because that's really about short-term credentials, whether those are certificates or certifications, badges. We have a robust world of credentials that are sort of not degrees. And it's a little bit challenging because, in fact, many could argue that we have too many of them. We currently have over 730,000 different credentials in the US labor market. And navigating them, understanding what they mean, what they actually do for you is a big challenge. But that reality goes alongside that for many workers, what they're going to find is whether they had just a certificate or certification when they went into the labor market, or a degree or a four-year degree, or even a four-year degree and an advanced degree, they'll probably want to add things on as they go. And we've got to build a more robust system which people understand that they can go back and get these kind of credentials. And again, it's sort of understanding both, what's valuable. It's having institutions that provide high quality, short-term learning opportunities, and ensuring that those are aligned with what employers are looking for.
That was great, particularly as you think about the ROI that individual adult learners are having to think about when they make these different decisions. Sid, would love your perspective here.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with everything that's been said. Took the words right out of my mouth. I think, to another way to think about it and to get to your question about where people really would go to be thinking about this. First, there's the big picture, as was mentioned. I don't think we know yet where people will really go, which I'll talk to. We know, as was mentioned, that 2 and 4 year degrees are not going to prepare you for a lifetime of employment. Regardless of field, we're all going to need lifetime reskilling. And it's different than lifelong learning, as we've talked about in the past. People that were sort of older, interested in going and studying a field that they didn't major in, but wanted to go back. That's critically important. I come from a liberal arts background. Like that's still something that is going to be a part of my life. We're talking about something different here though. And I want to make sure people are not conflating the two and confusing them, because I think, it is very different when you look at just technology and the lightning pace of change. If you're going to lead in any of those fields, you need to constantly be going back and understanding sort of where things are and frankly how it impacts whole industries and work. Industries too will become more dynamic, more adaptive, and will need to become that way as well. The point, though, that I think is interesting to really dive into is where people will go for this training. And this is where we don't know yet. Most of our four-year universities aren't structured for regular and returning students in the mass way that we would want it. Our community colleges have been traditionally filling a lot of this gap, but are they really prepared to do that at scale when you're looking at the nation, et cetera? All of these issues are different depending on region of the world as well. So, different lenses considering that. There are a number of nonprofit organizations that work in this space. We partner and invest in a host of them. There are some that are having some real breakthroughs. They don't cover every place. They don't work at a scale that can cover everyone, and they don't provide, frankly, the type of trainings. And frankly, there's a big disparity in capacity and ability within that space. Additionally, there are, of course, many companies that provide trainings. They're often very much focused on a specific company and the needs within that company and particular jobs. And frankly, the government could come in and provide broad-based programs, but it hasn't yet become a real policy priority with a sense of urgency to create that. So what we have is an ecosystem of folks who are working. You can see it's cross-sector, who all recognize that this is important. But as a nation, we haven't yet come together and understood how this would all fit together, how we do this best, and how we do it at scale. And it's really not clear how these sectors would really work together in a strategic or a unified way yet. So that's going to be really interesting to watch. I know we have folks participating in this from all different sectors, a lot from higher ed, from nonprofit, from business, who are thinking about this. That connectivity and the ability to lead across sectors, to really have breakthroughs for how we look at this comprehensively, I think will be a critical factor in the next 5 to 10 years. Specific, though, to where people would go depends a lot on sort of where they are. What Chauncy was talking about, where they are in their career, what industry they're in, the kind of training they need. Just know that there are a lot of different places to find that, and you want to be thinking about, what's appropriate for you right now, depending on the path that you're on.
Vinice, let me sort of add one point that Sid's comments struck me. So I think one other challenge here to add to Sid's list is that the way these kinds of shifts in kind of the relationship between employers and workers are going to unfold, they're going to be different industry to industry. There's going to be a lot of variation, right? Some industries will have a lot of this. That will become the norm. Other industries will not. They'll continue to have a kind of longer tenure structure. And that will vary not just by industry, but that will vary by firm, right? Certain kinds of firms and certain kind of sectors are going to have different patterning. Larger firms look different than mid-sized firms and smaller firms. And then, of course, the kind of firm you're in, right? The kind of workers in the firm will also vary. So I think, while it's important to keep our eyes on these big trends, oftentimes we look at those and we don't really capture that there's a ton of variation underneath that. And it will, your experience will depend quite a bit on, the kind of industry you're in and the kind of firm you're at. And that is important to keep in mind as we think about the impact of these trends.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you both more. And also the fact that we have millions and millions of workers that work in small businesses. And that's the relationship between employer and employee is also very different in that context as well. So today, more and more quality employment requires higher levels of education and training. Workers with some college credit but no degree, or workers that don't have any college experience at all, seem to be guided into credentials to try to ensure that they remain competitive in this very demanding work environment that we have. Is there data showing that this is leading to the right outcomes for workers at scale? And what sorts of trends do you guys see that are emerging in terms of connecting adults who are already in the workforce to degrees, certificates, industry certifications, licenses, apprenticeships, and badges? What are you seeing? Why don't we start with Sid this time?
Well, we're seeing all of that is true. We're seeing that it is changing and developing really quickly. I think that we're going to see increased focus on this across states, especially as we are dealing with a recession, hopefully coming out of a pandemic soon. There are millions more people out of work. And so this conversation was taking place beforehand as we were thinking about the impact of automation and technology. It becomes critical for the nation and really the world as we think about how to get people back to work and how to get them to be thinking about their career and about work and about stepping into what's next in a way that propels them in their career and not sort of lets them slip back or stay stagnant. And so, every mayor that we talk to, every governor, every member of Congress that we speak to, this is front and center for them. How are we going to get people back to work? How are we going to do this in the right way? How can you create a partnership with us to think about skilling and workforce and landing people in jobs? So we go back to these themes that have come up for us already on this call. The workplace is changing. We all need to become lifelong learners to remain competitive. People with college degrees, incumbent workers, people with degrees as well that are or underemployed. These need to be segments and focus areas for us to think about policy implications and approaches. The second is, of course, the relationship between employers and employees is changing. Skills are that new currency in the labor market, and we have a skills-based labor market that will enable workers and employers to demonstrate and communicate the competencies needed for jobs. Like, we're getting smarter about how to do that. Does the data show that we're winning or understanding it better or no, not, I mean, like, lots of question marks around it. What does some of the data show? There's a great McKinsey study that estimates 60% of jobs will be impacted by digitization and automation and at risk sort of loss over the next 20 years. So we know we will not have the same jobs now, in 20 years that we have now. Period. So the thought that you're sort of being trained now and you're going to stay in something that's stagnant, all of the data shows that that's changing. The Department of Labor has a bunch of reports out that also talk about workers moving between jobs, and they're doing that more frequently. It used to be, right now it's about 10 jobs that folks will have over the course of their career. You're looking at a new Forrester research study that shows in just a few years that's increasing to 15 jobs expected that people will have over the course of their career and lifetime. That's a massive shift in a very short period of time that we need to think about. That McKinsey report also was looking at 3,000 different business leaders, and their thoughts found that 61% expect an increase in the use of gig or temporary workers. These, again, are sort of massive shifts within our workforce within the United States, and we need to think about what that really means. It means again, during these times of incredible job losses and job uncertainty related to COVID, as sort of industries are shutting down, that we need to think about segments of workers, as Chauncy was discussing, the type of trainings that they'll need, and the realization that not all credentials are created equal. There really is a fragmentation across the world of credentialing that does not account for quality. There was a credential engine estimate that Chauncy was referencing that $700,000 to $800,000 in their credentials in the U.S. alone. And we need to bring transparency to all of that work. We need to systematize it. We need to measure quality. We need to, frankly, ensure equity in that. Because what can end up happening really quickly when you have these sort of bifurcated or dispersed systems is that certain people think that they're getting a quality training or certification system and program, and whole segments are being left behind or receiving a lesser quality that doesn't then lead to a pipeline of jobs. And so when you get to that access to quality programs being unequal, you're also seeing data that there are certain segments of people going into tech boot camps, for example. Most of them, there was a great study that showed that most of them, the average alum of 2,000 who were surveyed going into boot camp programs had 6 years of work experience, had a bachelor's degree. They were showing great wage increases, but that is a particular subset of our community, and not reaching all of the different folks that are in need when we're talking about credentialing programs. So, I don't think we have all the answers yet. There's bits of data that are, speak to all the points that we're making on this call, but I think that there's going to be a lot more research in this space to understand how we do it better, how we get smarter about credentialing, how we build transparency around those programs, and then, frankly, as I mentioned before, how we build an ecosystem that's cross-sector that really can propel us more quickly forward.
Yes, I totally agree, and I'm sure Chauncey, you have a lot more to add there. So eager to hear what you have to say here.
Sure. So, I think one of sometimes we frame questions about sort of post-secondary learning and credentials in terms of, BA versus AAs and short-term credentials. That framing really serves nobody very well, right? The reality is that we have 36 million adults with some college no degree and 50 million plus adults with just high school diplomas. We would like as many of them for whom it makes sense, who with what they want to get a BA to get one. But that is not going to actually be what happens for the 80, 90 million folks in this find ourselves in this situation, right? We need to have programs, whether they're certificates, certifications, occupational AAs, that are about getting people quality training that leads to credentials that have value, that then let them get a job, which is what, when we do surveys, that's what people talk about as the real driver for why they want to go back to post-secondary education. Cutting across all these issues, as Sid said, is this question of quality, and we don't have enough handle on how we determine quality and how we share that information so people can make more informed decisions. And I want to point out that that is also true when it comes to BAs, right? We have lots of BAs that actually do not have that much labor market value. And so what we need to do is really we should be able to do this, hold two things in mind, right? One is that it is good to get as much education as possible. A BA is a great thing, and I do think we are in this weird moment where there are some voices saying BAs don't matter. My advice is don't listen to those voices, right? BAs, can be a very important, critical tool for, economic and other kinds of success in life. But saying that and saying it's BA or bus is not the way we should be talking. We should recognize that people are going to take multiple pathways from high school into post-secondary education, into the labor market, and back and all over again, right? This is just an ongoing process, and we need to build those kinds of pathways and recognize we need to do both these things at once. The evidence actually points us in the direction of recognizing that when we talk about the right kinds of short-term credentials and AA degrees, they have a lot of labor market value. The evidence suggests that more is better, right? But even a kind of a short-term 6-week class can lead to improved wages. Obviously, more time tends to lead to, again, if you're choosing the right kind of skills that are in demand with the right kind of credentials. But when we look at increasing data recently on certifications, that's showing that even for workers who get certifications, for example, in advanced manufacturing, even if they don't end up in a job in the manufacturing industry, there are labor market wage gains from getting that kind of certification. So there is a whole complex world here that we need to better understand. We need to do a better job sharing the information about what has labor market value with the people who are trying to make these choices. And we need to really make sure that the message is not it's only one thing, or you're going nowhere. We need to recognize that we can be supporting lots of different kind of quality pathways, and those are going to lead to lots of positive outcomes. The last point I make is that there is a real equity story here. We look at community colleges. First of all, there are the majority of post-secondary students in this country are at community colleges. The majority of those students are students of color. And we look within community colleges at the divide between the for-credit side of the institution and the non-credit. The non-credit is where a lot of this kind of workforce, job-focused training is taking place. And those students tend to be more likely to be of color, more likely to be adults, more likely to be lower income. And so, this is, the data kind of shows us that the folks who are really trying to figure out how to make it in the labor market are looking for these kinds of pathways. And we need to do a much better job in ensuring those pathways get them where they want to go.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I would just add that the number of credentials is already increasing, and it's already it's not like this is new. These have existed. It's the pace of increase and change that is so notable and remarkable, and frankly, already in the higher ed system that we're talking about. So, Inside Higher Ed has a great report highlighting that 20% of U.S. workers have some sort of certification, 21% have done some sort of work experience program like an internship, et cetera. But in 1980, credentials programs at colleges was about 6%, and now we're at 22. So in that period of time, we've already seen this increase. I would posit that if you look 10 or 15 years out, you're going to see that percentage go through the roof. And so how do we get smart about that? Like, what does that look like? How do we plan for that? How do we have it be comprehensive and transparent and thoughtful? And so anyway, it's already here. My point, like, not just coming, it's already here. And so we need to get smart about it.
Right. The future is now. We keep talking about the future of work, but the future is today. What would be really interesting, Chauncy, you talked about the 30 to 40 million or so individuals who have some college credit, no degree, the 50 or so million individuals that have high school diploma, and then the millions that have bachelor's degrees. These conversations around short-term programs, accelerated training programs are very confusing. So if you had these hundreds of millions of individuals on this call hearing you, what advice would you give them? And then Sid would love to hear your perspective as well.
So, I think, whether you want to say we have lots of challenges, lots of opportunities, I'll leave that to you. But one of the things we need to focus on is let's call it navigation, right? We do not do enough in this country to start helping people think about, what kind of choices they want to make when it comes to what happens after high school. Quite honestly, many of the countries who we consider ourselves our economic competitors, they start that process early in, the equivalent of ninth grade. We do not do that well in this country. And we have then too many students who are on a kind of not particularly well structured kind of college, high school curriculum. Most students leave high school looking to go to college. Many of them end up at community colleges. For many of them, that doesn't necessarily work, partly because there is no real North Star. We haven't helped people think about what they're trying to navigate towards. So I think we need to think about navigation, not just in terms of helping people kind of make sort of big choices about the kinds of directions they want to head, but there's a series of choices along the way about the kinds of programs that are fit for them, whether it is going to 4-year or 2-year or short term, whether those choices allow them to continue, right? So we see innovation now around how we structure things like community colleges so that you have credentialing as you go, so that when you start, you're starting out getting a credential that has labor market value, recognizing that for many people, starting, you'll have to stop and go work, and then you'll want to come back. And so, the advice would be to invest in some ways as much time as you can in trying to research and understanding, seeking out, whether it's at your current institution, friends, neighbors. We have resources now online that really help you think about, well, what is it that I want to do? Understand then, how do I get those kinds of skills? What are my options? How do I afford that? And then, what kind of institutions are in my region, in my neighborhood, in my community that I can pursue, and how well do those institutions do in helping people persist and complete? That's a lot, but I think no matter whether you're thinking about a short-term, 8-week non-credit training program, which hopefully is going to get you the kinds of skills that employers are looking for, or you're talking about a 2 or 4 year degree, understanding, how this degree fits in to the larger kind of structure of the labor market, the way in which skill demand is shifting is something that as everyone, no matter what they're doing, needs to do more of.
Completely agree with everything that's been said. Hard to add really because it takes words right out of my mouth. I think there's a few things if I were to give advice. One is we all really have to think about our lifelong learning approach in a dynamic way. That wasn't even that's not how I was trained. It's not the way of thinking of our traditional higher educational systems always. And so, it takes a very different concerted effort to revisit that throughout one's career and really think about it in a different mindset, in a growth mindset about sort of change and adaptation and evolution. I strongly encourage people wherever they are in their career. This is not just a conversation for people that are in high school or in college now or thinking about it. All of us, those that are non-tech natives, like people need to recognize how quickly our workforce has changed and is continuing to change, and create a different type of mindset, and start planning, and then tapping into all those resources that Chauncy was mentioning, the different paths that you might have. LinkedIn is, of course, and you mentioned LinkedIn earlier. LinkedIn, of course, is part of Microsoft, and so we, are thinking a lot about the economic graph and our tools that show how workforce is changing in every city and in every community across the country and around the world, and how the related the related jobs and then workforce skills that are needed for those jobs are shifting all around the country, are shifting within each industry, are shifting between different demographics. And so, part of that is going to be an understanding of where you are within that continuum, and where you want to go and where you need to be. The resources are out there. They're not all the same. You need to really do your research to figure out where you want to plug in depending on where you are. But it's dynamic, it's changing. The resources are there, though. You got to do the research on your own. This is not a set path of like you do these things. Someone's going to step up and offer you this sort of training, and then you're going to end up with this type of job. It all takes a little bit more right now to really sort of get yourself through that system. But speaking of the data we were talking about before, all of the data shows that with the right type of programming, we're seeing people make significant leaps, whether they're getting that additional skills training at their employer, through nonprofit organizations, going back to in terms of the progression of their career, in terms of both short and long-term pay, all sorts of reward and sort of benefit within workforce. I mean, people are really taking this leaps and bounds ahead because they're recognizing that the workplace has changed so significantly, and if they don't have these additional skills, they're inching back versus leaping forward. And so you ignore this at sort of your own peril. Not the easiest thing to figure out how to navigate, but critical that we all start thinking in this new and dynamic manner.
Yeah, I want to underscore one of Sid's points, which is that we often that's left out of this conversation is the reality that some industries are really good at sort of moving you along a ladder, right? Some industries have really strong kind of certification hierarchies where the way you climb the industry is you keep on getting certifications, and it's really kind of transparent. And employers are often, investing in you. Other industries, it's the employer as a particular approach that really gives you both the kind of clarity and signals about the pathway, and then supports, investments in sort of ongoing training. We don't really talk to people about, look, that's something to look for. That is, if you want the kind of security of an industry that's doing a good job investing in its incumbent workforce, look for that. Right? Other people are happy to kind of think about, be an industry where you're going to get less of that, and you're going to have to go figure out, how to kind of navigate and, sort of do it on your own. But we don't actually explain to people that industries vary, and one of the ways they vary is in how they invest in their workforce.
Very, very interesting. And I know we can talk about this for hours. With all of the changes that we're expecting to our labor market, what do you expect the future relationship between post secondary institutions, students, and employers will look like? And how can the education pipeline better incorporate adult learners, both as a population to be served and as a resource to utilize? And just kind of going back to some of the responses that you each had around the advice to workers, would love to get your perspective on like the racial equity, your perspective from a racial equity lens here too. Sid, you
All
go.
right. Yeah, sure. Well, a few different things that we've talked about, quality mattering when it comes to certification. I'm not going to dive into that. I think that's going to be a really important conversation across higher ed as we're thinking, as higher ed leaders think about what how we approach that and what that really looks like. So let me talk about a couple of other things though that I think are important that we should at least put on the table, especially as folks that are participating in this are policymakers or working across this ecosystem. One is issue of access in general. You're looking at, and I'm thinking, let's start at the broadest sense in broadband, in access to, there's no point in talking about all these certification programs for communities that can't access them in a host of ways, whether that's hardware, through connective technology, et cetera. And so you look at places like Finland, where access is seen as a right. It's seen as so fundamental to being able to be successful, sort of in the future and in your community and in your career, that they're thinking about the policy implications of the right of that within that space. If you look at places like France, skilling is seen as a right. And so I think we're going to have some fundamental questions that higher ed, both on a thought leadership and a pedagogy in a sort of way, but there's frankly a bigger, broader conversation that I think is going to be critical, that higher ed can help us lead and study to understand how to approach this thinking and this work related to access at a broad sense. The second is, I think for higher ed institutions in particular, the connection to landing people in actual jobs, the connection to businesses and thinking about what those skills are that are needed, where industries are going, and a real understanding of how you create better synergies. And I'm not just talking about pre-professional, and I'm not just talking about a certification into that a company is providing at a higher ed institution into a certain job. I'm talking about real breaking down of the ivory tower mentality, that it's sort of you're in these closed walls for 4 years or two, and then you're out in the workplace, and that there is not a dialogue or a relationship that continues over the course of a career. I think breaking that down is going to be increasingly critical. And then finally, that issue of broader equity, of racial equity in particular. We shifted a major one of our grant initiatives this summer as the horrific murders, frankly, across the country were taking place, and a real focus with the nation on racial equity. We shifted a round of grant funding that we were doing, looking for 50 leading organizations in the United States that work on skilling programs in particular. And we said, this grant round is only going to be for these organizations that are led by Black and African American leaders. And we partner with a host of foundations and other institutions that sort of gave us a scoping of what that would look like and how many people would likely apply. We were looking at older, not really, K through 8 or K through 12, but really, higher in high school and looking on then to adults. That was our segment. And so that narrowed it even further. And they said, you're going to get a few hundred applicants, maybe, if you're really going to have this lens and this qualification. We were immediately overwhelmed with 1,300 applications of organizations led by Black and African American leaders within this space. And we will be announcing who those winners are next month, the 50 for this cohort, and we'll be looking at really building a community of learning and understanding over the next few years, and it will likely grow in another cohort or two, within that segment. The conversation that we plan to have in empowerment of this new community of leaders within this space is critically important, because at almost every point in the process, when you're looking at whether people have access, the type of skilling programs that they are utilizing or have access to, and actually getting placed in a job, the whole continuum that we're talking about, there are great discrepancies right now related to race and equity within the US across all of that. And so we really need to think about how we put this on the table, how we build transparency around this conversation, and how we tackle it in a comprehensive way that recognizes the broader context and the complexity of really working on these issues.
Wonderful, Sid. Thank you. Chauncey?
So, this is, in some ways, this is, one of the most important questions, but it's one of the questions we have some of the weakest answers on, right? So, how do we do a better job ensuring that, employers, the demand side of the labor market, are better aligned with the supply side, education, training providers? And, I think we've got just lots of sort of fuzziness in the way we often think about this. The first thing is really recognizing that employers actually aren't the greatest actors in this situation, right? They actually aren't so good at telling us what they want, right? Sometimes they themselves don't know because the world is changing too quickly. Sometimes they know they're not really good at communicating this kind of thing, right? And so we have to sort of suspend what is our impulse, which is to somehow think of employers as sort of fully rational actors when it comes to kind of signaling what kind of skills they're looking for. That's a huge challenge, right? And it's not, obviously some firms are much better at that, but by and large, it's a big challenge. Because what it means is that both workers and education training providers, they're trying to guess too much about what is actually in demand. So we have to really think about fixing that. We also have to recognize that what firms do, it's not, there's two at least big buckets here. There's the kind of talent pipelines, what they're doing when they're looking for people sort of coming into the firm, and then what they do with their incumbent workforce. And again, they do lots of very different things, and there's just a ton of variation there. I think the core challenge we face in the US is when we look at other countries, classic examples of Germany and Switzerland, places that do a much better job at setting a table in which employers and industries come and sit down with educators and really understand, what skill demand looks like, chart how that demand is going to shift, build programs, whether it's just the sort of standard K-12 curriculum or an apprenticeship pipeline or something that's, post-secondary. They invest the kind of time and resources to better connect those. And of course, none of this is a one-time thing, right? This is something that's got to be done over and over again because the kind of skills that are in demand are shifting. Again, in some industries more than other, but in the end, all of them shift over time. So we need to really think about, how we build this world. I think what is exciting is that I think we're seeing some real innovation. Some of that innovation is coming from employers who really are recognizing the need for having closer partnerships with, whether it's four-year universities, community colleges, other kind of training providers, so that there is this well-aligned talent pipeline. You're seeing a lot of actually interesting things happening with employers around investing in incumbent workers. That was a bit of a product of the very tight labor markets we had before COVID. But hopefully we'll be able to kind of keep some of that alive. As firms, actually, one of the things I think data is doing is helping certainly bigger firms get smarter about the cost of too much turnover, recognizing that they have to invest in pipelines, like they invest in pipelines for every other sort of resource they need. Talent is also one that they can't just expect the person with the right skills to show up at the door when they want them. So, what we also see then on the training side, we see lots of really innovative education leaders who are really thinking about how they get inside firms, how they really get the kind of intelligence they need about what is happening in industries and build programs to reflect that. But they face lots of constraints too. It's a creating new kinds of programs that are responsive to demand has got lots of challenges, lots of friction in the kinds of post-secondary education institutions we have that make it hard to be kind of responsive to lots of these shifts. So we really need to think about how we take this entire world and sort of move it in a direction in which we get more of an ability for supply and demand to align. We give sort of leaders the ability to be more flexible. We want to hold them accountable, right? We're not going to sort of let them be flexible, not produce outcomes. But that also means we need better data that helps us see when these kinds of programs and partnerships are really working. It's a big agenda. The good news is it's starting, but we all need to be clear-eyed about we have the fact that we have a long way to go.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining us today. Bye.
Thank you.